Thanks everyone for joining us. I like to appreciate Professor Isgail Gabisa and Dr. Milkesa Midaga and Bill Jalan, a former colleague, a wonderful journalist, for joining us today to share with us what they know about the war in Oromia from different perspectives. So the topic of this conversation, as it has been announced since yesterday, is understanding the war in Oromia. The war in Oromia is one that started in 2019, but not much is known about it, not least because there is not enough media coverage, but also because it's a war, as many refer to it, is hidden from the attention of the world because of a communication blackout. It is a war that involves the Oromo Liberation Army. The government would like to refer to them as Neo-Nafxanyaa. It's something that we will be dissecting to understand that difference of naming in and of itself. And on the other hand, it involves the federal government, the regional forces of the Oromia regional government, and the paramilitary irregular forces of Fano from the Amhara regional state. Most affected areas are Western Oromia and Southern Oromia. But recently, the war has moved closer to Central Oromia as well. Central Oromia being Addis Ababa itself. So what do we know about this war? The genesis of it is a question that I would like to ask Professor Isgail Gabisa as someone who has been involved from back then in finding a peaceful resolution to the conflict. And why is it the lack of communication and lack of media coverage? This part, my former colleague Bileh Jalan, who has recently traveled to Western Oromia and has written an article about the involvement of the Fano militia by speaking with local people where he has traveled to. And I expect Bileh to light some shade for us. And in terms of the dynamics within the ruling party itself is Dr. Milkesa Midaga, who has been a senior member of the ruling party before he departed, I think 2 years ago, but I stand to be corrected. And so without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Isgail Gabisa to start by shedding some light for the next 5 to 7 minutes. What is it, the genesis of this conflict, and how it started about in 2019 already, and where it is today? Floor is yours, Professor Gabisa.
The war in Oromia is part of a larger civil war that started in Ethiopia 2 years ago, and the seed for the conflict was planted on December the 1st, 2019, when the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front was dissolved into a new party called the Prosperity Party. The creation of a countrywide party was not just the creation of a new party, but part of a general policy of turning the country's politics away from the constitution of nations and nationalities and the multinational federal arrangement, which its detractors call derisively the ethnic federalism. So basically, the creation of the party was a political act to change the trajectory and the direction of Ethiopian politics altogether. And that is really the basis of the war in Ethiopia. The Oromia war is part of that larger war. That's the first point that I just wanted to make, because with that action, the Ethiopian politicians made their intentions clear and set themselves on a collision course, which eventually culminated in a genocidal war in Tigray and elsewhere in Ethiopia. Now, I think the decision was basically bereft of any strategic or practical political objective. It is simply a decision that grew out of the belief of the Prosperity Party's chief that he would be able sufficiently to demonize his opponents, primarily the TPLF and the OLF, in the eyes of their respective people, and to use force to brutalize their supporters into submission and to buy off the elite of these opposing camps by dispersing financial largesse. In a way, to put it in short, in a way people could understand, the civil war in Ethiopia is basically the result of the militarization of Ethiopian society and commercialization of politics. This is really what plunged into Ethiopia into civil war, the wish of someone to create Ethiopia or recreate Ethiopia in the image that he or she wanted, a centralized unitary state with an autocrat atop the pinnacle of political power. That is the cause of the civil war. You can parse it in any way you want, but it really is a war that was simply created in the minds of the Ethiopian prime minister and now playing out in all corners of Ethiopia. I think we know about the Tigray war, the part of the civil war. It's characterized in many different ways as a border dispute, as an ideological war. But for me, it is basically a war that was deliberately started for political reasons. We're just wasting our time when we're trying to frame it in a constitutional way or any geostrategic considerations or the future of Ethiopia. All that is probably important if it is happening in the context of a rational politics. But I think for me, this is really the process of creating a personalist rule in Ethiopia by demolishing institutional autonomy, by getting rid of the rule of law, the political decision to make processes to make decisions. This is really what unleashed a war against many of Ethiopia's nations and nationalities in their quest for democratization, constitutionalism, and multinational federalism. Now, say that is the overall context. The other thing that I wanted to really speak to is that this war started not in Tigray. The Ethiopian government started the war in January 2020 in the Wallagga region. The military operation that was authorized by Abiy Ahmed in December of 2019 was led directly by General Birhanu Jula with the assistance of General Tesfaye Ayalo, who was the operations chief in the office of the deputy chief of staff at the time. It was planned to begin Tir 1 or January 8 and to last about 30 days until Tir 30, 2012 or February 8, 2020. It was a holistic and full-fledged war against the OLA leadership, including Kuma Diriba or Jalmaro and his lieutenants. The ultimate objective of that operation was to wipe out the OLA leadership, to dismantle its network and crush its capacity to mount any foreseeable challenge to the OPDO predominance, political dominance in the Oromia region, and based on that achievement in Ethiopia in general. The secondary objective was to degrade and destroy the Oromo nationalist movement by crushing it in Wallagga, which the Prosperity Party officials saw as the source of Oromo nationalist ideas and the center of resistance against the government. I'm not saying that this was the case, but it is the belief, and Dr. Milkesa could support me in this or contradict me, but the idea is that the source, the fount, the head of Oromo nationalist movement is in Wallagga. If you kill it in Wallagga, you can kill it anywhere else. What they see in Wallagga is, in common parlance, a radical and extremist Oromo nationalism. So that was the goal. Now, this war was conducted in total darkness. Telephone lines were cut off, internet was disrupted, electricity discontinued, and the ENDF, the Ethiopian National Defense Force, employed scorched earth tactics. That is burning down homes of alleged OLA sympathizers. Farmers were prevented from harvesting their crops. Urban residents were prevented from traveling to rural areas, and tens of thousands of Oromo young men were hauled into prison and makeshift camps and precinct offices and in private prisons. So many were killed because of guilt by association, and family members are still missing. Many were killed because they were suspected that their family member had joined the OLA. So this is the character of the war that was conducted for 30 years. So since then, the war has gone on for 3 years. All the atrocity crimes that were committed in Tigray that the world came to know about were all committed in parts of in that part of Roma or in other parts of Oromia. The Amhara Fano, the Amhara Regional Special Forces, Amhara Vigilantes, and even private armed groups created by OPDO officials, government officials, to look and behave as if they were the members of the OLA, have committed the same atrocity crimes in Wallagga that were committed elsewhere, in particular in the Tigray region. They have done so, and
I like to get back to Professor Isgail. I'm sorry to rudely interrupt you. I like to get back to the layers, multi-layers of security dynamics in the regional state that you've just briefly mentioned now. I like to ask Dr. Milkesa, since he has been a senior official of the ruling Prosperity Party, the Oromia Prosperity Party, I wanted to take him down the lane to explain to us why was the war started in the first place. We remember that in 2018, when the prime minister came to power, the first thing he did was liberalize the political space in Ethiopia based on the recommendation of the former EPRDF government, which had conducted the 17 days of meeting and issued a list of things to have been done. One of the things was to liberalize the political space. So the Prime Minister Abiy, when he came, he started, liberalizing the political space, and that was when the OLF at that time in Eritrea and an armed resistant group based in Eritrea and partly also in Western Oromia came to Ethiopia in Addis Ababa with a rapturous welcome. But can you tell us what happened to the peaceful engagement between the Oromo Liberation Front and the ruling party?
I totally agree with Professor Iskel Gabiza's outline or points that he made earlier. And so as far as Abiy's, Prime Minister Abiy's policy towards Oromia and Oromo problem is concerned, he uses different approach because he wanted to hide or the war in Oromia or what is going on in Oromia is totally a hidden thing. No media in Ethiopia is allowed to report. No foreign journalists are allowed to go to Oromia and report things, with exception of a kind of um, um, not formal way. So why Abiy uh, preferred a kind of hidden war in Oromia as compared to Tigray is one of the key reason is that he wants to appear or present himself to the peoples of Ethiopia and the world at large that he is in full command and control of the Oromia, the region from which he held to the premiership of Ethiopia. That means he wanted to create the impression that Oromia is fully supporting him and his prosperity party, which is not the case. As a person from within the ruling party, I have a lot of observation, and I will come back to Sadali's question of the liberalization of politics and the return of OLF leadership from Asmara to Finfinne, Addis Ababa, and what follows. Um, so I want to take us back to a little bit in the summer of 2018, what happened in Ethiopia. So in the summer of 2018, uh, I was part of the government, and I was senior cabinet member in the Oromia regional state, and uh, I have I witness account. So the tendency was uh, to establish um, a kind of a single party rule in Oromia region. Um, so um, we particularly in the summer of 2018, the security apparatus wing of the Oromia region established uh, a kind of a killing squad to neutralize what is so-called a Baturbe in the Mdolo. This Abaturbe is a kind of uh, uh, an insurgent group that was established where non-violent peaceful protests were totally forbidden, particularly in Damdolo and Western and Kelam, Walaga. Uh, Non-violent protest was totally forbidden at the time, particularly during 2014, 15, 16, 17. So kind of this, they call it a Baturbe. So in order to neutralize this Baturbe, the Oromia security branch established in the summer of 2018 a kind of a counter Baturbe to liquidate or neutralize the true local insurgent. So with this artificially created Batur Bay, many government officials, have been killed in Walaga, and with that, the name was given the
Just
accountability.
to clarify, Dr. Milkesa, are you saying that when you were in the government, you recognize that the Abatorbe group, which is sort of like a hit and run squad, blamed for a lot of assassinations in the region, was this group a creation of the ruling party in Oromia? Is that what you're saying?
There were two Abatorbes. So the later Abaturbe I'm talking was established by government. Yes, you are right. So with this, these Abaturbe or counter Abaturbe established by the security apparatus of the government later on scaled up to take the form of a rebel group. So this started in the summer of 2018. And then to the worst, following the return of the OLF in September 2018, there was a violence in Burayu. You all remember that gruesome violence against Gamo community. So I was assigned to calm down people to have conference with Gamo communities and the Oromo. I have traveled to Arbamij, Gamo zone of the SNNPR region. I have traveled to Burayu. I have kind of tried to, make a kind of reconciliation conference. So uh, no one asked who were the perpetrators of the Burayu incident. So I know in detail about that. The purpose
Just
was
to clarify to our audience who may probably not be familiar with the Burayu massacre, is the first massacre to have happened in the post Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia, a few months after he came to power. This was a massacre targeting a minority group of the Gamo community living in Burayu, which is around 25-kilometer radius from the capital Addis Ababa. This is the first massacre to have been known deliberately targeting minority communities. And that, in a way, is the start of privatized violence in Ethiopia in post Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's regime. That is what Dr. Milkesa is talking about. May I return back to you about the dynamics of the security, because the Abatorbe dynamics that you are talking about is just one layer of armed groups in Oromia regional state operating today, I think even until today, other than the Oromia Regional States Government Forces, the Ola Armed Forces, and forces that probably are known to the government as Shani or OLF Shani and the Fano. So these are multi-layered security apparatus that are functioning in Oromia Regional State today. Let me get to Bila here because he's one of the speakers, and I wanted to ask him, based on his recent trip to Western Oromia, to share with us, because he has written about what is Fano doing in Oromia. And I want Bila to share with us what you've learned about the presence of Fano. Fano is an armed group that comes from the neighboring Amhara regional state, which complicates the crisis in Oromia today, because for two reasons. One, it's unconstitutional, and two, it's involved in parallel activities with OLF and other armed groups in the region. So Bila, if you take 5 minutes and tell us what you have learned about during your trip on the presence of Fano in the region and what it means towards the security crisis there. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. It's nice talking about the war in Oromia and explaining it to audience who are unfamiliar with it. A war that precedes, or I can say, the original civil war in Ethiopia. Well, Fano has stated since its formation, as we all know, Fano participated alongside, or what they called Fano at the time, participated alongside the Cairo in the Oromo protest, protesting in the Amhara region against state brutality and state violence, and demanding rights uh, and lifting of state of emergency and all that alongside the Cairo. But since then, they have developed into a militant organization with many observers accusing the Eritrean regime of training it uh, and supplying it with arms. But that's a discussion for another time. And they formed themselves into a militant group, and they stated declared goals. These declared goals were annexing territories they considered to be historically Amhara land. These territories include North Shawa in Oromia region. In Oromia region specifically, they include North Shawa, uh, Kalam Wallaga, East Wallaga, West Wallaga, and Horogodro Wallaga. They consider these to be historically Amhara land. They stated that openly in their discussions, in their meetings. They recorded videos of that on YouTube for everyone to watch. They went as far as claiming Adama, Bishoftu, uh, definitely Addis Ababa, uh, as Amhara land, as stolen Amhara land, and they have been operating ever since to achieve that goal. Their push into Wallaga came only after their intrusion into East Shawa, for example, and North Shawa, when there was no adequate response from the regional government, the Oromia regional government, and the federal government also. They saw the opportunity to advance into Wallaga under the banner of protecting Amhara civilians. Uh, they have been, uh, from what I have seen, from what I have heard also from residents in Western Oromia, they have been going on uh, raising missions, like erasing villages and towns from the map in Western Oromia. They've been on a vengeance mission, much to say. I think that's how they recruit their soldiers, by telling them we are avenging Amhara lives lost in Oromia. Um, their activities uh, range from targeted killings of specific uh, members of the community there who are accused of supporting the oil financially, or providing grassroots support for it, and indiscriminate killing of Oromo civilians in the villages they come upon. So with that, causing thousands and thousands of villagers and urban dwellers to flee their homes in an attempt that I can only explain, and I highlighted in my article, to evacuate the area and repopulate it with Amharas from neighboring Amhara zones in the Amhara region. So that is pretty much what Fano is doing in Western Oromia and the rest of Oromia, honestly. Not only Western Oromia, it has also expanded to Northern Oromia and Eastern Oromia, East Shawa included. So that is basically what they're doing. They are killing civilians, terrorizing civilians in order to have these civilians flee from the areas that they inhabit, maybe affect a demographic change in the area to later incorporate it into Amhara region. And we have seen an example of that in North Shawa. I forgot the name of the district. They annexed 280 hectares of land of it into Amhara region. And to my knowledge, that part of Oromia now is administrated under the Amhara region with impunity, and less information is available about it because no one is willing to talk about it. And I can summarize. That's how I can summarize Amhara Fano activities in Oromia region.
Thank you, Bila. Obviously, the suffering of civilians is not limited only what is the Fano is inflicting there. What we know is that there is a massive demobilization of civilians, particularly of Amhara members of civilians from, for example, Kiramu. I was watching a news reporting yesterday of IDPs who are sheltered currently in Bahardar area and are pleading to get support, and they blame the Neo-Nafxanyaa. So now, I think this indicates to us about the multi-layered presence of different armed groups in Oromia regional state. That's not confined just to the OLF, the OLA, or the Fano, or the federal government only. Professor Isgail, earlier you raised about even the presence of private security forces that are involved in militarized activities in the regional state. This brings me to you, Professor Isgail. If you can please explain to us what it means to have this kind of multi-layered involvement of different armed groups in the region, but the government is, blaming everything on the Neo-Nafxanyaa. Everybody blames Neo-Nafxanyaa. OLA releases a statement denouncing that its forces are not involved in that. Just yesterday and the day before yesterday, the Oromia Regional State Government Communication Affairs Officer, the head of the office, Hailo Adunya, was giving a presser to the media in which he denigrated the Neo-Nafxanyaa. There is no distinction in the government's recognition of armed group in the region. It's just Neo-Nafxanyaa, which is also designated as a terrorist organization. And he blamed that the Shane does not have any command center, any leadership, any discernible organizational structure there. So the government will not be having any peaceful conversation with this armed group. The OLA on its side released a statement saying that this is false. OLA has organizational structure there, and that it's the government trying to avoid to sit down to have a conversation to solve this problem peacefully. Professor Isgail, if you could please tell us, what does it mean that such kind of complex security presence is there in the region, and then it's just watered down to government versus Neo-Nafxanyaa? In the long run, in an attempt to solve this problem, how is this kind of dynamic affecting efforts to solve the problem?
Thank you.
the presence of different armed groups. I think Melkesa started it, but let me just try to group them since actually 2005, I think, when the first incursions were made into Oromia from the Benishangul Gumuz region in the Esa area, and ended up killing a number of people in Nakamte and the surrounding areas, where Abadullah Gambada was the president of Oromia at the time, and went all the way to Nakamte and was able to repulse the onslaught from that region. But since the beginning, since that time, there were private militias. When I say private militias, these are people in Oromia who are not Oromos, who actually have the means to arm people. So there were private militias, privately owned, operating in the Oromia region since 2005 or 2008 and 7. Since the first time there were private militias. The number of private militias owned either privately by individuals who have the means, or created by government officials since the 2018 change of government has proliferated. There are many private militias whose name I cannot really outline here. There is the OLA clone. The Abaturbe is a different issue, but the OLA clone, what I call OLA clone, are people who have putting the wig on their heads, supported by the Oromia government or some other people of means, who act like or behave like OLA, but going about traumatizing the Oromo people in their villages, in their homes, and in their homesteads. So that is another one. But there is also the Amhara regional government special forces, Amhara police, making incursions into Oromia, as Bilen was talking about. Sometimes actually clashing with the Oromia state government security forces, but most of the time going about their business freely within Oromia, with the explicit purpose of taking land. By the way, that land grab or expansionism has a plan, but there's no time to talk about that. But it's a part of a grander plan that the Amhara elite who are recruiting, training, and sending armed fighters from the Amhara region. But there are also settlers in Oromia who have settled a long time ago, 30 years ago, by the government, or even longer than that, who have lived in Oromia for about 30 years or more than that, and now they are armed by the federal government. In this one, the deputy prime minister is on record that they will arm them so that they can defend themselves. But look, these are the people who have lived in Oromia for the greater part of their lives, without any day being threatened threatened to live in Oromia. They are now armed, and not only armed, but also part of the killing machine that was unleashed on Oromia. So there is multiple layers of armed groups within Oromia that have nothing to do with the OLA. OLA has no business killing Amharas or Oromos or others or government officials. OLA is simply fighting to defend the Oromo rights to self-determination. With regard to what Hailu Adunya said, all I would say is I would respond in two ways. The first one is that this is a historically tried and true method of any Ethiopian government, beginning with the Der government, simply to deny that there is an Oromo interest group, political group, that is advocating for the right of the Oromo people to be respected. This has been a historical tradition, to simply outright deny that doesn't exist. That is what he is doing, simply following in the tried and true pattern of simply dismissing any right group that advocates Oromo right. That's the first thing. The second thing is what Melkesa actually alluded to earlier, is that the Oromia government now believes, or the OPDO government now believes, that in Oromia, there shouldn't be any
opposition force by any form, whether armed or peaceful means, shouldn't exist in Oromia, because Oromia is the backyard of OPDO, or Oromia Prosperity Party. That the way to stay in power, they argue, is to make sure that in your power base, in your natural power base, there should be no contest whatsoever. So there is the part of that plan to fight the armed group, but also to obliterate any political force that is operating within Oromia. So that is the reason that they are simply denying and denigrating and the existence of the OLA. But look, let me say this and not finish. There is, if they want the names of the command structure or the leadership of the OLA, I can provide them with all the structure of the high command, the regional commanders, and other levels of military commands. There are also the support group outside Ethiopia who are doing diplomatic and advocacy works. If the Ethiopian government wants to make peace and resolve the political conflict through a peaceful process, they know what to do. Any one of us could assist them with that, but it's part of simply denying. There is nothing in our power base, as Milkesa was saying, that we are doing everything that is humanly possible to answer Oromo questions. Say we have already answered it. There is no need for any opposition. That's part of the political calculation.
Thank you, Professor. I wanted to come back to Dr. Milkesa, because you mentioned about the massacre of the Gamu minority earlier, and we talked about the presence of at least two versions of Abba Torbe. I want to bring to you one particular dimension to this, and I want to ask you if you know about it, Dr. Milkesa, when you were a part of the government. I remember when I was still in the newsroom of the Addis Standard magazine in March of 2021, we fielded a report about a massacre that took place in a church in Horo Guduru, which was blamed on the OLF. And the OLF at that time wrote a complaint letter to the editor, which came to me as I was the editor at that time. And they have said that this reporting was one-sided and we do not take responsibility for this massacre in that Orthodox Christian church. And they said, we would like to ask a person by the name Fakada Abdissa. We tried to find out more about the presence of Fakada Abdissa. We found out a little bit, but we hit a wall after a while. And we learned that Fakada Abdissa was a part of the OLA, but then has been disarmed and then re-recruited by the government and sent to Western Oromia as a counter force against the OLA. Dr. Milkesa, in your assessment, and since we have talked about the Abba Torbe, and Professor Isgain also mentioned about the report of young people who have been forced to wear artificial hair. This report, by the way, is released by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission as to the government, the local governments forcing young people to wear artificial hairs to pose as rebel fighters committing crimes. So this exists there. What do you know about the presence of forces under Fakada Abdissa, which the OLA blames for most of the killing at that time, at least? I don't know what happened now. Do you know that the re-recruitment of Fakada Abdissa happened when you were part of the government, Dr. Milkesa? This might explain the complexity of the security dynamics there. Thank you.
Thank you, Adali. As far as I know, when I was in the government, there was an attempt to establish a counter-rebel force, which looks like rebel force, as Professor Scale Gabis also mentioned, and as many of us at that time suspected. So at that time, what I know was the security branch of the Oromia government has scaled up the practice of establishing counter-killing squads over major cities in Oromia, including Adama, Bishoftu, Ambo, Nakamte, Damdolo, and etc. They scaled up into a form of establishing a kind of parallel insurgent group, which looks like the OLA. So I know this. I don't know much about Fakade Abdisa in person. I don't know about him, but at that time he was part of the disarmament. He was taken into Botot Olei, and then to other centers of demobilization and reintegration training, and then indoctrination, whatever, and then he went back to the forest and to the bushes. So since then, we had two, not parallel, but a faction led by Fakade Abdisa, who was not part of Ola. That, but I don't know about much about him. But let me emphasize on the layers of security apparatus in Oromia. I know 9 layers of security apparatus in Oromia. Number one is the counter rebel force led by the government security apparatus. We are discussing about that. And recently they established revolutionary guard. They call it Gachanasirna. This guard, revolutionary guard, includes all members of the society in the region aged 18 to 55. They were forced to become members of the Revolutionary Guard to defend the regime against any local insurgencies. So it is part of the militia of Oromia. And third one is the Oromia Regional State Special Force. The Oromia Regional State, for the first time in history, it trained more than 80,000 special forces and dispatched into Oromia and also into Tigray, as far as I know, in less than 2 or 3 years. So Oromia Special Forces are there. Number four, we have a counter-insurgent forces, specially trained within the Oromia Special Forces. These are specific section of the Oromia Special Force. They are there to deal with the insurgent groups. We have also federal police forces stationed and camped in different parts of Oromia. We have the National Defense Force operating in Oromia. We have also in the central part of Oromia, we have Republican Guards, which was created by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. They operate in central part of Oromia, particularly in Shah zones. And also number 8, we have now Fano Amhara Militia, as Bile also clearly outlined. They are operating, intervening in Amuru, Jardaga, Keramu districts, in Horogduru and East Walaga zones that share borders with Gojam zone of Amhara. And particularly in East Shoa zone of Oromia, the Amhara Regional State Police Force, Special Forces, uh, uh, they intervened up to Shano, very close to Addis Ababa, and also in Karayu areas. They have incorporated. They have incorporated into the Amhara regional state. So it is very complicated layer of security apparatus in Oromia. So it is difficult to conclude that everything that is happening in Oromia is perpetrated either by the government or by Ola, because we have a lot of complicated and complex uh, issues. Let me finish by um, emphasizing how these all emerged. Uh, Number one, because Abiy, rose from Oromia, uh, the ODP decided to run Oromia the way TPLF ran Tigray for over 27 years. This was decided formally in the party I was member and central committee member. It was decided by the central committee of ODP in 2018 that we should run Oromia the way that TPLF ran its regional state for over 27 years. To that
What
end,
does it mean? Does it mean with no other political parties involved, just the OPDO only?
yes, absolutely. Earlier, Professor Scale mentioned about this. Only ODP slash OPDO, which later turned it Prosperity Party, is allowed to form government, to do political activities in Oromia. And to this end, the campaign against Oromo youths since, the massacre that we mentioned earlier in Burayu, that was an incident that the government took because it was not the Oromo youth who committed that heinous, gruesome crime. I know because at that time I was part of the top leadership of the Opido. It was not that. The government arrested security head of the Burayu region, and then nothing happened. So that was the beginning of the defamation campaign, and then the campaign to decimate all Oromo youth forces. And then you remember what happened in 2019 and 2020, including the killing of Hachalu and the consequences, the subsequent measures taken against the Oromo youths. And now there is no uh, peaceful or democratic force that could operate in Oromia. And therefore, those who uh, survived from the killing, from the arbitrary arrest, they joined Ola. And therefore, now the, the Ola, in terms of size and in terms of activities, it is as close to Addis Ababa as earlier mentioned. Therefore, it was the closure of political space that led to this armed movement. The attack on democratic institutions and democratic forces compelled the people to go to the bush. So, as far as I know, a lot of conspiracies and a lot of secret establishments are there. Therefore, on top of that, no one is reporting from the region. Therefore, always the Ola is to be blamed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Milkesa. I want to get to Bile and to share with us more about his experience of travel there. But I want to, by way of reinforcing what you said earlier, I think it was 2.5 years ago that Colonel Kamal Galchu gave an interview to one of the local television stations at that time, disputing the account of the robbing of 17 banks in Western Oromia, which was blamed on, once again, the OLF, the Ola rebel fighters. He was the head of the Oromia Regional State Security at that time. And after his resignation from his position, he came to a television station in which he said the robbing was an orchestrated act by the regional government security apparatus in itself. And so I think this corroborates the claim that you just made, Dr. Milkesa, with regard to parallel insurgent groups that are organized to conduct different activities. This same kind of witness was also given by an MP not long ago, I forgot his name, who was blaming a presence of parallel security forces that are directly under the command of the Oromia Regional State President, and doing the killings of, once again, minority Amhara community groups in Western Oromia in June, the 9th and the 8th of June this year, which is another massacre there, which we're still trying to understand the full extent of it. And so, having said that, Bile, when you traveled to these areas, have you had a chance to speak with local authorities on the reason why Fano armed group are in Oromia Regional State? Because this, according to the current Ethiopian constitution, is not only unconstitutional, it's downright criminal. Have you had a chance to talk to local authorities why they are not doing anything in terms of preventing cross-border attacks by armed groups from Amhara Regional State, which this is, again, is verified by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission's recent report to that. So there is a verified report about that, because there's a lot of denial going on. Bila, if you can just tell us briefly about it. And I wanted to get to the legal and constitutional aspect of this to Professor Isgel after you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rana. In Oromia region, officials don't speak to you, actually. This is a struggle we've been facing since my time with the standard. Uh, they decline to talk to you, and um, if you push on it, as many of our colleagues, you go behind bars. So I tried to speak to them, but none wanted to speak to me. However, there is uh, uh, the residents that I spoke to, the people I spoke to on the ground, have this sense. This is something that Professor Ezekiel mentioned at the beginning of this base. He said there is the war in Western Oromia is an attempt to break the spirit of rebellion within the Oromo masses, and this is something that many people on the ground share. Uh, People in Western Oromia and specifically in Wallaga um, do have that sense. They have the sense that they're being targeted because of their identity, because of their defiance, because of their uh, opposition to the policies that uh, came with the new government. Uh, Unemployment is very high in the region. A lot of factors also exist uh, uh, in the region, and the sense that you get from people is that the regional government and the federal government are attempting to break our spirits, to drive us out of our land, to crush once and for all a rebellious uh, Oromo movement. That is the sense that you get from people in Wallaga when you speak to them. Um, that is pretty much how I hear it. Um, um, I could only speculate why there is no response, and my speculation would come in line with what I have heard from the ground. It is an attempt. There is no response exactly because there is an attempt to crush the will of the Oromo people. We ignore during this conversation. We ignored that yes, there is an ongoing war in Western Oromia, but at the same time, the war in Southern Oromia have never stopped, even when the new administration came into the picture. It didn't stop. People in Guji have suffered, in Guji and Borona zones have suffered from the repercussion of the regional government. Um, for since it goes as far as 8 years, and it didn't stop. It is ongoing, and many of these people now have many of the youth, influential youth in the area, influential people in the area have left the country or chose to join uh, the armed struggle, the oil. Uh, that is something that is happening. I'm saying all this to point out to the general feeling that people in both these regions have. There is an attempt to crush the will of the Oromo people, and because there is an attempt to crush um, the will of the people, the regional government is not responding. That is how pretty much how I see it. That's pretty much how I heard it from people. But regional officials, they usually decline to speak about such important issues. Suffered with that when I reported on the drought in Bale and Mohana and all that. We suffered with that multiple times. They decline to speak to you. They never speak on serious issues, and if you push on it, you end up in prison or worse. So that's what I can say.
Thank you, Billah. Yes, thank you for bringing the war in southern Oromia as well. And just to bring another gruesome anecdote to that, what accompanied again the first few months of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed coming to power is also another massacre of the Gedio minority community in southern Oromia, in Gedio zone. And that has never been investigated. We don't know the perpetrators were, but what we know is that that was one of the massive, large-scale atrocities that also triggered the displacement of 1.5 up to 1.5 million minority members of the Gedio community there. This happened in the summer of 2018 already, and again, it's blamed on the Ola armed groups or the OLF-Shane. There has not been any independent investigation of who did that. I think communities are trying to rebuild their life at the moment. So thank you, Bile, for bringing this to our attention. Professor Isgael, I want us to discuss about the constitutional implication of this. And I want you to say a few things about on the privatization of violence, particularly that's affecting us in the Oromia region as we spoke, the presence of multiple security forces there that indicates that there is a keen privatization of violence in the regional state. And what does it mean constitutionally? Can we really safely say that the constitution is upheld at the moment? The other intriguing thing that I want to ask you is the Prosperity Party currently, its major stakeholder or ally is the Amhara Prosperity Party. And you have the forces from the Amhara regional state crossing over to Oromia, which is unconstitutional, as I said earlier. What does it mean to this political alliance at the upper level that the Prime Minister's party is relying on, the Prosperity Party? And that, you think, the reason why this problem cannot be solved, because it will upset the political balance in Arat Kilo?
I think on the constitutional part or the political lineup, let me put it in try to put it in a larger context for people to understand what's going on right now, because if I kind of remind you, then everybody would be able to see what is unfolding in Ethiopia. So put it in a larger context as briefly as possible. Now, the political program, the Prosperity Party is putting in place was designed and handed over to the Prime Minister as a reform roadmap at the beginning of 2018. The plan or the roadmap was basically designed, spearheaded by former Derg officials and their allies, including the late Dr. Kasa Kabade, who was one of the first people that the Prime Minister invited to Ethiopia to counsel him. Another was Major Dawit Wolde Georgis, a former Derg official, who on Vision Ethiopia, which is an organization that hosted the Prime Minister here in the United States when he came here for that private visit in 2018. That's when the whole thing was discussed. What was discussed? What was the vision? What was the plan? The content of the plan is basically had two goals. One is the primary goal, and the other is a contingency goal. The first one is to destroy everything that the TPLF had created. That anything or everything, the constitution, the federal arrangement, the developmental state, all of this is going to be dubbed as subversive. It was made by the TPLF. Destroy everything, attack everything, and destroy. That is the first thing. The second is demonize, degrade the constitution and the federal arrangement that others also espouse, and do whatever is possible, employ whatever instrument is available to achieve these goals. So the war, the incarceration, the alliance system, the lies, the mayhem, everything is part of this program. That is important. The second thing is, if the creation of a unitary state or returning the clock back to 1974 proves unachievable through whatever means that would be employed, then the fallback position is to create a greater Amhara state. So what Dylan was talking about, Wallagga, through Amaya district in Waliso, all the way to Awash, and then north up to Wallo, including Raya and Western Tigray. This is part of the contingency plan to create a greater Amhara or Beta Amhara. That is the plan. That is what is going on in the country. So the constitution, is it a source of conflict? I mean, the constitution was in place for now about 30 years. But during the time that the EPRDF was in place, there were many violations of human and democratic rights, but there was really no intercommunal conflict at the time because of the agreement, the political agreement, a political pact in 1991, in which the representatives of the nations and nationalities agreed that they're not going to resolve political conflict through the use of violence. But that was basically dismantled. Now, about the alliance with the Amhara region, one thing that one thing that should be underscored about this is that in the Amhara region, the visit by Isaias Ahmed to Gondar was also another time when how Isaias would assist in implementing this program was forged. So the alliance in the Amhara region is not quite with Abiy Ahmed. They want to get rid of Abiy Ahmed once they have when he has outlived his usefulness to them. What is being done right now is to ask the Eritrean government and its forces to settle in the Amhara region, and from the Amhara region, help the Amhara first to implement the idea of a unitary Ethiopia in which they will be dominant, and if that's not possible, to expand, grab lands, ethnically cleanse some of the areas that are important, but include in the greater Amhara all those regions from West Wallaga to Awash and up north to Raya, Azebo, including Western Tigray. So there is really what is going on. That is the agenda. The agenda is this idea. So it has nothing to do with the constitution. It has everything to do with the political pact that was designed over here, and now Eritrea is being used to implement it.
Thank you, Professor. I wanted to ask one last question to Dr. Midaga and open the floor if anybody has a question there. With regard to the constitution, having in mind what Professor Iskel just said now, the counter argument to that is, the Amhara elites and leading opinion makers and media personalities blame the Oromia regional government of an attempt to create a homogeneous region by depopulating and demobilizing the Amhara community living in various parts of the region. The regional state's intent is to create a homogeneous Oromo regional state. Dr. Milkesa, when you were in the position of power, if I can say, what was the protection by the Oromia regional state given to minority groups in the region, or any other national groups, any members of community from different national groups there? Why was that protection all of a sudden revoked, and communities are facing vulnerabilities and targeted attacks at times? Why is the regional state not been able to protect the safety and security of other national groups in the region? Is it because of the claim that the regional state is trying to create a homogeneous state in Oromia? Is it because Oromia regional state's constitution itself authorizes other national groups in the region? What was your experience, Dr. Milkesa? This will be my last question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadale. I was in the Oromia regional government for 2 years as a member of the regional state cabinet. The Oromia regional government run by OPDO does not have the homogenization policy. Even it does not want to implement the constitution of the region. It doesn't want. I can say it doesn't want. I myself have asked to implement the constitution in several places in the region. As a result, for example, in the last 27 or 3 decades, particularly illegal settlement. You know, you cannot settle illegally. You have to be settled formally by the government or by, legal means. But illegal settlements, whether it is in the central Oromia, surrounding Addis Ababa, or in major towns in Oromia, or in the western Oromia, or where, for example, where the Fano militias are claiming, as Bilay presented earlier, to forcefully incorporate into Amhara region, there have been series of illegal settlements in those areas. I can mention because I was head of the Oromia Land Administration for more than 1 year. I have a lot of researches that my bureau conducted in those areas. So illegal settlements in rural and in urban areas intensified during the Opidio regime. And particularly, for example, the language policy, this is one of the critics that people level against, the Oromia regional state. One can go to Adama or Bishoftu or even Ambo and see what is the official language of the cities in Oromia. It, it is not Avan Oromo. So the administrator, for example, when I am assigned to lead a conference, local residential conferences in Bishoftu or Adama, I am forced to do that in two languages, in Amharic and in Afan Oromo. But the Constitution of Oromia clearly states that Afan Oromo is the only official language in the region. So I don't understand. On top of that, one can go and see the central statistical agencies of the federal government employment reports in Oromia. Who is being employed? And one can go and confirm that the Oromos in Oromia are underemployed. The Oromos in Oromia are underemployed in Oromia regional state. There could be, a kind of paradox to many. But I have the statistics, and one can go and see, for example, the Amharas who are in Oromia, they are employed more than their percentage. This is not a false or a kind of fake news. One can go and check the Central Statistical Agency's personnel report of the Oromia, the ethnic composition of employment in Oromia. This is an unofficial data. Therefore, I don't see, particularly often, the only claim from the side of the opposition that may be, I can raise is about the election into the Chafe Oromia. So this is about knowing the official language of the region, election. So they argued that the Amharas in Oromia could not be elected into Chafe because of the language issue. Well, but in this regard, if the Oromia regional government, uh, because there are a lot of Amharas who speak Afan Oromo as well. They are member of the government, and they are member of the top officials, and they are member of the key leaders of the Oromia regional government because they speak Afan Oromo. For that matter, I don't want to mention people. One can go and see the composition of ethnic compositions of the Oromia cabinets. One can go and see the compositions of, leaderships, agencies and commissions and the directors and the employees in Oromia. So the issue of language is another issue. But in terms of ethnicity, they all are there if they can speak Afan Oromo. I don't see problem in speaking Afan Oromo. Uh, so the only thing I can mention is about language. Otherwise, homogenizing in terms of ethnic identity, Oromization project or whatever they are mentioning when explaining the policies of a video, this is wrong as far as I know. So rather, the opposite is true. So in the last 27 years or 30 years, things in terms of demography, in terms of language, cities in Oromia, you know, districts bordering, for example, North Shore. You can see different districts in North Shore, East Shore, Horoguduru, where now things are openly in terms of mass atrocity. So things have changed. I don't see any project of homogenization by Opidio Zadale.
Thank you, Dr. Milkesa. Later on in the closing remarks, I want to ask you all for your recommendation on how to really go about trying to solve this problem now. The war, the OLF. Ola High Command released a statement yesterday recommending 4 points there, but with in the background of this complex nature of the crisis in Oromia, we still need to find out what is the easy way to go out of this. And I would like to return that to you together with Professor Iskel. Earlier, you raised a curious question about the involvement of Eritrea, and I would like to ask you what it is that Eritrea could get out of this crisis. But we can get back to that later on if we have time. I have a lot of questions from audience, DM questions sent since yesterday, but I wanted to give priority to participants here. If you have a question, I would like to kindly ask you to limit yourself to 2 minutes maximum. You can raise your hand to get and the answers to be 3 to 4 minutes. And please mention who you would like your question to address or to answer your questions when you are asking. So the floor is open for participants. And the first question comes from Yasser. Yasser, if you could please, Yasser Said, proceed to ask your question.
Hi, hello. Thank you for letting me speak. I really appreciate the space, and I've learned a lot about the situation in Oromia and the ongoing war that I didn't know about. But my question is going towards Mr. Murtasa Gamechu, and my question for him is a two-part question. And my question, the first part is, I know you gave an interview recently on Kush Media Network, speaking about the situation about Abiy's master plan. And I would just like you, if you could maybe elaborate on that one for us and for us English speakers. And the second part of the question is, and as we know, the change that came about in 2018 was a change where we were looking for democracy in Ethiopia and for people to achieve the right to self-determination according to the constitution, if necessary. And a big player in that was the former president of Oromia Regional State, Atolama Magersa. And I know that you are very close with him and that you were also part of his cabinet. So the second part of my question is, and what happened to Atolama Magersa that made him pushed away from the center of Ethiopian politics? And do you think that he will make a comeback to Ethiopian politics anytime in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, so I will focus on why the former president of Oromia Regional State, Lamma Magarsa, was pushed away from the politics of Ethiopia or Oromia. That is very good question, and so Lamma was part of the Oromo Youth Movement. Partly, he led the movement as president of Oromia. He didn't crush the Oromo Youth Movement, and he paved the way for the change that happened in Ethiopia. So Lamma was part of the Oromo nationalism that Professor Iskel earlier elaborated. Lamma was part of the Oromo nationalists who are the champion of the Oromo cause. Therefore, his vision of Ethiopia and Prime Minister Abiy's vision of Ethiopia are two different things and incompatible. So Lama stick to democratize Ethiopia rather than creating a one-man rule through the merger of ethnic-based ruling parties, then the formation of Prosperity Party. That was the formation of Prosperity Party, and I call a kind of betrayal against Lama Magarsa and betrayal against Oromo youth movement led a conflict between Lama Magarsa and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and then he was pushed away from the national politics of Ethiopia and silenced. So it is disagreement. I don't think the establishment of Shaggar City is part of our uh, discussion. But if Adale allows, I can say a few things about that.
Dr. Milkesa, I think it was a very important question that Yasir asked, although it was not part of our conversation today, but you gave quite an explosive interview yesterday to Kush Media. Maybe if you could just take 2 minutes to summarize. I know it's a very short time, but you can really say a few things about that, Dr. Milkesa.
Okay, thank you. So the establishment of Shaggar City is it came about. It came this time because for me, the government believed that we have accomplished in terms of dividing the Oromo elites. We have accomplished in terms of crushing Oromo nationalists, democratic forces. We have divided the opponents of the Oromo oppositions. We have co-opted some of them, and we have successfully crushed those who disobeyed the government, and therefore the Oromo cause may not get any support at the time or unified support. Therefore, they bring in this new agenda of creating a city which is an extension of Addis Ababa or Finfinne. Thereby, they are going to divide Oromia. So the prime minister is establishing his palace in the new city, which implies that the establishment of Sugar City is part of this expansion of Addis Ababa, and then gradually they are going to merge Addis Ababa and Sugar City and form kind of Sugar Kilil or whatever, which is in fact part of what Professor Iskeel earlier mentioned, which is weakening Oromo nationalism, empowering those who ideologically support Prime Minister Abiy and in favor of unitary state. So as long as Prime Minister Abiy enjoys support from the unitary states, he doesn't have problem with them. So that is, I think, part of the whole project of moving away from multinational federal arrangement, a constitutional system that Sadale raised, into a kind of unitary one-man rule and at the expense of the Oromo farmers and the Oromo people surrounding Addis Ababa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Milkesa. There is a second question from Gumako. Gumako, if you could please keep it short and also directly ask the person that you would name the person that you would like to ask. Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you very much, my sister, for hosting this kind of very mature space. Anyway, Dr. Milkesa, and one is for reminding some short history. The second minute, I'll ask questions. And so, Dr. Iskeel, we know each other, so welcome. Dr. Eskel, and Milkesa. Physically, we don't know each other anyway, but we know politically each other. First of all, I would like to remind you guys, today is a very important day for the Eastern Oromia Jarso tribe, 1954, when British handed over to Ethiopia. Ali Wadai Sadiq said no to the second colony, and they started war, 1954, and lived Jarso for free for 5 years. 1960, with the British of help and Israel, Jarso crashed and the Jarso genocide took place. So this is a memory of those two sad days and the bravery rejection of Colony Day, November 29 and 30. And that's just for reminder for all our intellectuals, because we don't know much about our history. Second, so I'm gonna come to my question now, Dr. Skel Gebisa. You know, from day one, I never ever accept Ethiopian democracy, because there would be no democracy possible in Ethiopia. Oromia colonized by force. Freedom is not given, it is taken. As Dr. Milkesa put it, and you put it, Oromia has been grabbed from each corner by colonizers, by others, by every nation and nationalities of that empire. Oromo people's land grabbed from every corner. Our culture diminished. Our language diminished. As Dr. Milkesa said, I went for the first time in 20-something years. In Hadama, I couldn't buy from the shop by Oromo language because I only speak Afan Oromo. So that's called Oromia capital city. How you guys can you think to repair this empire, monster empire, destroy all our identity and our being, and continue supported by the settlers and Oromo, some Oromos who lost their identities? How can you think mediation would be possible with Ola or with Oromo people? So why don't you guys make very clear to Oromo people, there's only one way to get a freedom and get respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Gumako. Professor Isgail, if you can please proceed.
Sure. Thanks, Guma, for the question. Now, for me, politics is always about making rational choices. And it's not about a private vision. It's all about the public good. So there may be a number of options to envision Ethiopia, and a number of options to resolve the political conflict in Ethiopia. So before the war, before the civil war that I talked about earlier, there were options. That the Ethiopian constitution was a compromise position between the secessionists, the so-called secessionists, and the so-called unitarists. That it was a break-even point, that this was about sharing power and economic resources and treating everybody equally. That was the compromise solution. The war was basically conducted to destroy that, as I was saying earlier. So making choices have become very difficult in Ethiopia. Presenting a choice has become very difficult in Ethiopia. It's very difficult to ask people against whom genocide was conducted to make political choices. It's difficult, but within some framework, making choices from the many options is imperative. How difficult it is, I understand. I hope I have my own personal views, but simply let me conclude by saying that we have to make choices. As a country, as nations and nationalities in Ethiopia, we have to make choices. Right now, the choice that we have made to impose one's will by force on others has not produced a desirable outcome. It has resulted in millions killed, millions displaced. The social fabric that ties people together have been frayed. It's a very, very difficult and dangerous place to be. In that place, making that choice is very difficult, but then we have to make a choice to proceed forward with what the road that we are on, or to pull back and make another choice on resolving the conflict politically and through dialogue.
Thank you, Professor. I understand that this is a football night, so I think we're going to be wrapping it up here. But before we go, I'd like to ask all the three of you to reflect, given the conversation we have had so far, the complexities of the security situation in Oromia, the vulnerabilities of our minority community groups in the region, and this confrontation, the narrative confrontation between the federal government, the regional government, and the Oromo Liberation Front, OLA, with regard to what it is that we need to bring in to have a meaningful solution to the conflict today, at least between the two of them, if not the other multi-layered presence of security forces in the region. The OLA, as I said, has forwarded 4 points in its statement yesterday. The Oromia regional state government, on the other hand, has said that, no, what I want is for the young people who have mistakenly joined the armed group to return back to peaceful means, and the other, I will annihilate them. This is not the first time the regional government has said so. In fact, since 2019, there has always been a deadline the regional government was issuing to completely wipe out the OLA so that people in Oromia can live in peace. So we are at a deadlock. If this is where we are today, what is the way out? Professor Rizkiel, if I can start from you as your concluding remark on the way. What is the way out of this crisis now?
Just following up on what I said, it has really been made very, very difficult. And the position enunciated by the speaker or the spokesperson of the Oromia government speaks to that issue, that they want to annihilate. Why they want to annihilate people who have political demands is not clear to me. OLA has own political demands. It's fighting for the right of self-determination. It believes that is the bedrock principle to resolve all political problems. It's a fundamental human right. The Ethiopian constitution enshrines it. The international instruments of human rights actually support it. The history of the world since the French Revolution actually believes that the right of self-determination is really what shapes the modern world. That's what OLA is demanding in a nutshell. It's a political demand. It's a constitutional demand. It's a legal demand. Why annihilate them? Why annihilate them? Why would you annihilate people for the political beliefs that they have? And that's the problem. That's the problem. What the government, led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, is trying to achieve, the restoration of an old imperial unitary order, has put the viability of the Ethiopian polity itself in serious doubt. It's not OLF or OLA or TPLF or others that are actually demanding the right to self-determination. It is the Command, it is the Agao, it is the Benishangul Gumuz, it's the Somali, it's everybody else. Why do you want to use sheer force and the public relations means to demonize, to denigrate, to demean, to defame, and to destroy? That is not the way to conduct politics in Ethiopia. So the OLA position, at least until recently, has been clear that the right of self-determination is an inviolable, unbridgeable, and non-derogable right, not of only Oromos, but all Ethiopians and the oppressed nations of the world. So the Ethiopian government is the one that needs to make a choice here. Annihilating is impossible. OLA 3 years ago was operating only in limited corners of Oromia. It has only few combatants. Since the Ethiopian government unleashed the state's military and security arsenal on Ola, it has only grown in numbers and expanded its area of operation. Ethiopian government has now taken to daily drone bombings. It's not going to work. We know it hasn't worked for any government in Ethiopia. It is actually what actually dismantled previous governments. So the choice is up to the Ethiopian government. If they want to annihilate, destroy, and that they continue on the road that they have come on and left a wake of destruction in this country, it's up to the Ethiopian government to make that choice. Ola, they have made it clear in their statements before to yesterday, and their statement yesterday, that this is an enforced conflict on them. They need to protect their own people, their land, and their rights. They're fighting for their rights. To accommodate is up to the Ethiopian government. They are rights bearers. The right holder is the Ethiopian government. A decision lies in the court of the Ethiopian government to resolve this political problem using political means.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Milkesa, I wanted to shift it a little bit so that we don't get a repetitive answer to that. What do you think is the role of the current constitution with regard to reaching at a peaceful settlement of the conflict in Oromia and in Tigray and elsewhere and the country? You know, we recognize that there are armed conflicts in Benishangul, in Gambela, also some resistance in Amhara region by the Qimant group and the Agao. We recognize that there are security problems in Afar-Somali borders. The reasons could be different, but these are national groups that are having the same demand of the right to self-administer. Dr. Milkesa, do you see the current constitution as having the basis for a solution, a peaceful solution for these multiple crises in the country, or should the constitution be dismantled, as it is a demand from some, particularly the Amhara national group in Ethiopia and the urbanite Ethiopians? Should we get rid of the constitution so we can solve this problem, or could these problems be solved through the constitution? Thank you.
Thank you, Sadale. As far as I know, from 2014 to 2017, before I joined the government, I was part of the Oromo youth movement. And our demands were constitutional demands. It was not an extra constitutional or a kind of abandoning the constitution. It was about implementing the constitution properly. So rather than responding to the Oromo youth demands, so the government led by Prime Minister Abiy and now Prosperity Party, is trying to establish a kind of an authoritarian unitary establishment. So the war in Oromia is not only the war against kind of rebel force or whatever we are talking about. It is a war for me against the Oromo people who demanded democratization, who demanded constitutional implementation, respecting the constitution. So the Oromo youth demanded the government at that time, led by the TPLF, to go back to the constitution, to implement the constitution without any reservation. All part of the constitution was very good. So our demand at that time, and then, now there's no constitution in Ethiopia. There's no constitutional system in Ethiopia. The government led by Prime Minister Abiy disregarded all elements and clauses in the constitution and now implementing political agendas that are beyond the constitution. Therefore, I see a lot of solution in the constitution. We can go back to the constitution if the willing, as Professor Scale said, if there is political will from the side of the government. So the issue of Oromia is not about the issue of OLA. Now it is about civilians. Every day, civilians are being drawn, attacked. No one is talking about civilian attacks and massacres here and there by drone ground forces and Amhara Fano militias, and no one is speaking about that. We don't expect the government of Ethiopia use its own media to speak for the civilian. I don't expect, but they should have done that. And then international community is not speaking. I don't know because Oromia is considered as a private property of Abiy, Prime Minister Abiy, and international community seems to have ratified, confirmed, approved that proposal uh, of leading privately Oromia. So I think Oromia should be open for media, international media. So international media should try to enter into Oromia and see what is going on. Or should we? I mean, at least they have to try, and if they are prevented, let us know. So my final conclusion is, the government is not going to solve through use of force. No, never. As far as I know, with the exception of the highway from Addis Ababa all the way to Nakamte, the highway, the roads, with the exception of those highways, the remaining rural districts have fallen to the Ola as my informants, and as I have my own uh, 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 information and reports. So I don't think drone and military forces. Oromia is too large to silence. So the way the government is at it, I don't think it is going to solve. But I think the government should reconsider its own vision of establishing an authoritarian unitary system. It should. That is incompatible with the vision of the Oromo youth movement or the Oromo people, or I think all forces, democratic forces in Gambela, in the Shangul Gumuz, in southern nations and nationalities, including in Amhara region and in Tigray. People are demanding democracy, human rights, protection, and back to the constitution. I don't see why the government wants us to restore the old glory, and which is incompatible with modern system in general. So I suggest the government may have to see democratic way of solving the problem in Oromia and elsewhere in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mikesa. You mentioned about the drone attacks. As of the last 3 to 4 weeks, there has been an intense drone attacks, including targeting of civilians and congregations in the church. We've been somehow, there has been some reporting from the region coming. This leads me to Bill to say his final words about what role should media play in terms of bringing this crisis to light and creating enough awareness. We understand the international community has its own understanding of the war in Oromia. My understanding of that is that Abiy Ahmed is considered, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is considered, and I'm saying this based on several briefings that I do for diplomatic community. He is largely considered as the answer of the Oromo question because he came in the backdrop of 4 years of Oromo protests in Ethiopia. So as an Oromo prime minister, he's largely accepted as the answer of the Oromo question, which I think is a grave mistake. Having said that, Bila, what should the media do? Why is the media not reporting enough about this crisis the way it deserves to be reported? And why are the drone attacks even not getting enough coverage of both the local and the international media, in your understanding? And what should be done to change that by way of bringing this crisis to an end, playing a role as a media? Thank you, Bila.
Thank you, Todala. I want to talk about the media first. Every media house has its own policies, has its own agendas to pursue, and has its own editorial standing and whatnot. And this is precisely because this regime was presented as an Oromo regime that coverage for the conflict in Oromia is not getting the attention it deserves. The human suffering in Oromia, of course, the main suffering is from political and communal violence, but there is drought ongoing in Oromia. There are cross-border attacks that are coming from Somali region, from Amhara region, from Banishangul Gumma region, across all borders of Oromia. And these are problems that are not highlighted, especially because of what I mentioned earlier. This regime be presented as being an Oromo regime. In the matter of what should be done in Oromia to address to end the conflict or to address the challenges that are facing Oromia today, I think we should go back to the grassroots, because this is about everyday civilians. This is about a farmer not getting to farm his farms, which is happening now in Wallaga. This is about a truck driver who cannot move products from different parts of Oromia to another, from a part of Oromia to another part of Oromia. This is about them. So I think the solution will only come from the grassroots, from everyday people who have their own vision of how Oromia should be governed, or how Oromia should be in the future. I think that's the only solution, and I don't see the solution coming from the current regime or from any political settlement that it doesn't include the grassroots. So that is what I have to say about the conflict in Oromia. I think we should go back to the grassroots, talk with people, see how they want this conflict to end, see how they want Oromia to progress in the future. Otherwise, the conflict will keep resurfacing, because it started from not answering the key demands of the protesters in 2018. That includes employment. Oromia is one of the highest one of the regions that has the highest number of unemployed youth. And other questions, such as the question of Addis Ababa, the question of language and all that. So unless we go to the grassroots, the conflict will keep resurfacing. If not in Wallaga, it will resurface elsewhere, which I am seeing signs of elsewhere in Oromia. So grassroots involvement is the key to ending the conflict in Oromia.
Thank you, Bile. This was one of the most constructive conversation that we had, and thank you very much for all the three speakers there. I would like to end it. I know we have run longer than we thought we would, but this was an important conversation that needed to be had. Speaking of the grassroots, I would like to end this conversation that the grassroots is actually today starving. According to the latest revised humanitarian response plan that's produced jointly by the UN humanitarian partners and the government itself, there are now 11% more people needing food aid than they were in January 2020 when the plan was first written. And speaking of the grassroots, children constitute 52% of the people in need of food aid, and women and men constitute 24%, according to this report released this week. The need for humanitarian response, not just in Oromia, but across the country, has risen up significantly. And this is the grassroots that we are talking about. So politics is above and beyond what is happening between OLA and the government, or OLA and the Oromia Regional State Government. It's above and beyond the multi-layered security structure in Oromia regional state, which is playing a role in bringing a negative role in bringing an end to this conflict today. And so it's with this sobering note that I would like to finish this space, but I hope we will be managing to have the time to have more conversation ahead as we go by, and I hope to be able to invite government representatives and also representatives from OLA, if possible, to have a word with each other as part of that effort to contribute towards bringing this conflict to a peaceful end. Bila, thank you very much for highlighting the role the media can play. I still believe that the media is not paying enough attention to that, particularly in fostering relationship between different national groups in the country. In this era where politics is highly polarized, the government is setting the narrative, the government is mediating the relationship between different national groups, and that is negatively contributing to intercommunal conflicts that we see in many places today. So we have a lot to converse about the crisis compounding Ethiopia today. So with this note, I really thank you very much for taking your time, Professor Isken. I know you have to go, you have class as Dr. Milkesa. So thank you very much. Bila, also my former colleague. It was a pleasure to have you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.